Well, I hope everybody had a nice Christmas, and that will continue until for another couple hours. When we think about Christmas, we always think about getting things maybe that we don't have, things we've been wanting, and people ask us, what do you want for Christmas? And some of us, like me, say, I don't need anything, I don't know, I don't really want anything. And other people have a list. Seems like the younger you are, the longer your list is, right? As you get older, that list kind of gets smaller because you have everything you need. But I want to use that thought to think about tonight things that we already have, not things that we need or things that we want to get, but things that we already have. And one thing in particular. And as our text today, if you don't have your Bible with you, get one from the pew in front of you and turn to Psalms 139. We're going to read through that psalm, and then we're going to go dig into it a little bit and see what lessons we can glean from it. The one great thing that we have been given, maybe the second greatest thing that we've been given as Christians, is the gift of ourselves. We're alive. We're sentient beings created by God, and this psalm kind of celebrates that. So let's read it together. I'm going to be reading from the the King James Version, because I find the King James, especially for the books of poetry, to be the most beautiful. Just the way they flow and the poetry there is just really quite special. So Psalm 139. O Lord, thou hast searched me and known me. Thou knowest my downsitting and mine uprising. Thou understandest my thought afar off. Thou compassest my path and my lying down, and art acquainted with all my ways. For there is not a word in my tongue, but lo, O Lord, thou knowest it altogether. Thou hast beset me behind and before, and laid thine hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain unto it. Whither shall I go from thy spirit, or whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend up to heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there. If I take wings of the morning and dwell in the utmost parts of the sea, even there shall thy hand lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, even the night shall be light about me. Yea, the darkness hideth not from me, but the night shineth as the day. The darkness and light are both alike to thee. For thou hast possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect, and in thy book all my members were written, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them. How precious are thy thoughts unto me, O God! How great is the sum of them! If I could count them, they are more in number than the sand. When I awake, I am still with thee. Surely thou wilt slay the wicked, O God. Depart from me, therefore, ye bloody men. For they speak against thee wickedly, and thine enemies take thy name in vain. Do I not hate them, O Lord, that hate thee? And am I not grieved with those that rise up against thee? I hate them with perfect hatred. I count them mine enemies. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. And see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. What a beautiful poem. Because this was written so long ago, there are some phrases, some words in here that might be a little bit foreign to us that we might not use in our normal vocabulary, so we'll talk about some of those as we walk through here, but I've kind of broken it out into each verse there and given you some notes to think about that we can kind of take with us. You know, if I had to subtitle this psalm, I might call it the best pro-life essay ever written, or the best pro-life poem ever written, because that's really what all this is about. We're going to talk about that a little more as we go into it. So let's start with the first verse. O Lord, thou hast searched me and known me. The word search there means to examine very thoroughly. You almost can think of it like if you're looking through a microscope. A very thorough examination, intimately acquainted with it. And known me means to perceive, to find out, to discern, to distinguish, according to Brown, Driver, and Briggs. So God, what he's trying to say here is God doesn't just have a cursory knowledge of us. I mean, like we have of each other. Yeah, I know some things about some of you, but I don't know the totality of your thoughts and your actions. I see you for a couple hours a week, and then we don't see each other. Not true with God. He knows us deeply, completely, and nothing is hidden from him. That may be kind of a scary thought if you think about it. You can't hide anything from God. He can see into our hearts and into our souls. We don't have that luxury. When I look at somebody, I can see their physical attributes. I can make a snap judgment on it, but most of the time it's not even right or valid because I don't have all the facts. God has all the facts. He knows everything about us. And he knows not only our actions, but the motivations behind those actions. So sometimes it looks like somebody's doing a good thing or a nice thing, but their motivations are not good. And most people wouldn't pick up on that, but God would. Jesus kind of taught this same truth in Luke 12, verse 7. He says, but the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So he's trying to say here that God knows you intimately. If I said, Larry, how many hairs are on your head? You wouldn't have the slightest clue, right? Neither would I. But yeah, a lot, right? That's about the best that you could do. Or in some cases, none, right? That's easy for some guys, but so God knows us, even to the number of hairs on our head. Verse 2, thou knowest my downsitting and mine uprising. Thou understandest my thought afar off. So as we said, God knows when we're rising, when we're falling, when we're sleeping. He knows what we're doing. And he's afar off, right? He's not right here. I can see everybody here and I can see what you're doing. But God has the advantage of being able to see over everything. Everything that is far off from where he's at. We don't know how far heaven is or how to even measure that, but we know that it's far off, yet that doesn't matter to God. You know, we can't see things far off. We look into the sky and we maybe see a little point of light there and don't think too much about it, but that thing could be a gigantic planet or a gigantic galaxy. We just see the little part of it. God sees all of it. Verse 3, that's a hard word to say there, compassest, kind of a tongue twister. Thou compassest my path and my lying down, and art acquainted with my ways. Compasseth, according to the Webster's dictionary, means to stretch round, to extend as to embrace the whole. So to enclose or encircle. So God knows our whole path. Some of the other translations of the Bible use words like scrutinize. You scrutinize my path. You search out my path. You notice, you study, you watch. Any of those could be synonyms for that word, compassest. And when he's talking about my path, he's talking about your way of living. Unfortunately, the world doesn't seem to understand, or if they do, they don't pay much attention to it, that you can't really hide anything from God. It doesn't matter if it's light or dark, which we'll see in another verse down, or whatever. You can't really hide it. You can try to hide it. You can put a hoodie on and put a mask on, but That's not going to work for God. God can see through all of that thing. So the bottom line is, we might say in our common vernacular, you ain't going to get away with anything. It looks in our world like there are people that are doing evil things that are getting away with it, so to speak, but in the end, nobody's going to get away with anything. So maybe that can be some little bit of comfort for us when we see those evil things happening. Verse 4, for there is not a word in my tongue, but lo, O Lord, thou knowest it altogether. That's a scary thing too. You know, the book of James talks quite a bit about the power of the tongue. And in most cases, he doesn't have a lot of good things to say about it, because we often use our tongues for evil purposes, or to say bad things, or to tell lies, or whatever. And God knows those things. He not only knows our lies of what we call lies of commission, in other words, things that we say, but he also knows when our lies are lies of omission, meaning we omitted some things. We didn't really tell the whole truth. We maybe told part of the truth, but a partial truth is not really truth. You know, I find it interesting that God had put such a value on lying, or not lying, that it's actually one of the commandments. You may remember from when the Ten Commandments were given. In Exodus 20:16, it says, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Bearing false witness is lying. We would just simply say lying today. And lying is listed with other serious sins in several passages, like Revelation 21:8. Listen to this. But the fearful and the unbelieving and the abominable and murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. When you read through that list, you think, boy, that's not talking about me, right? I'm not unbelieving, I'm not abominable, I'm not a murderer or a whoremonger or a sorcerer or an idolater. But then he adds, and all liars. So he's equating the seriousness of lying with all of those other sins. A lot of times we don't do that. We have what we call the big sins, and then we have the little sins, and lying usually falls into the little sins category, but it's not the way God sees it. Sin is sin. It really doesn't matter, big, small. It's all sin. Verse 5, thou hast beset me behind and before, and laid thine hand on me. Now, as you read through this poem, remember that it is poetry, and so the writer of this poem uses some figurative language. So here he's talking about God laying his hand upon me. Does God actually have a hand, a physical hand like we do? Well, God is a spirit, so probably not. But he's trying to get a point across here, and he tries to express it in a human scenario that we can understand. So what does it mean that he has beset me behind and before? Well, beset means to surround, or to enclose, or to hem in, or to besiege. One Bible translation, which is like a paraphrased Bible, says it this way. You are all around me on every side. You protect me with your power. So in other words, God's built a hedge around us that, as we stay faithful, it offers us some protection. There's an interesting comment there from Spurgeon. I'm not going to read through it. I'll let you do that in your spare time there. But it kind of gives an analogy to an army. And then the second phrase there, and lay thine hand upon me. So what that really means is God's hand, if you want to think of it as a hand, upholds us. But not only does it uphold us, at times it restrains us. Those of us that have kids, sometimes you can just give them a gesture like that, and it means what? Stop or desist what you're doing. So God uses his hand not only to uphold us, but also sometimes to limit us or to correct us. How does he do that? Are we going to actually see a hand come in the sky and try to... No, he does it through his word. And that's why sometimes his word seems a little harsh to people, because it's telling you things you should not do. And a lot of people don't like to be told what they shouldn't do. But if we weren't told what we shouldn't do, we couldn't really hope to please God. That's why his word is so valuable. Let's move on to verse 6 there. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain unto it. There are a lot of people in today's world that think they're just about as smart as God, you know. Some people think they are gods, maybe with a little g. But if you think about it, how much your intelligence is, and, you know, God made us the most intelligent creatures of his creation, his physical creation. I guess we can exempt angels, but no other of his physical creation, the animal kingdom, has intelligence that comes anywhere near ours. So we have an intelligence, but we can't get arrogant about that and think, oh man, I'm so smart, I'm just, you know, God's gift to the world. Our intelligence, I don't know, if you think of your intelligence as a grain of sand and God's intelligence as the whole beach, that might give you a little bit of a scenario there. We have some understanding, but it is so limited compared to what God's understanding is, because he can see into the future, into the past, and he's omniscient. He knows everything. I like the way Isaiah puts it in Isaiah 55:9. He says, as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. That's a pretty humbling thing to think about, and we need to think about that and stay humble. Verse 7, whither shall I go from thy spirit, or whither shall I flee from thy presence? We don't use the word whither too much. You could substitute the word where, W-H-E-R-E there. Where can I go from your spirit, or where can I flee from your presence? I guess if you were to turn this into a modern phrase, it would be something like, you can run, but you can't hide, right? He's saying it doesn't matter where you go. You can go anywhere. You're not going to hide from God. You might think you're hiding. Get in a cave or something where nobody can see you. But a lot of people in our world, they don't want God to exist. And the reason they don't want God to exist is because they want to do whatever they want to do, and they want to do that without any impunity whatsoever. It's merely a pipe dream. You know, it'd be nice if you could create your own salvation like that. If you could say God exists and he exists, or say he doesn't exist and then he goes out of existence, but it doesn't work that way, obviously. You can't wish God out of existence any more than you could wish the universe out of existence. And humanity needs to understand that relativism that we see in today's world is just utter nonsense. You can have your truth, I can have my truth, and they can all be true together. God either exists or he doesn't. We both can't have our truth and both have them be right. Right? So we know that God exists because we have his word. Other people want to keep thinking that he doesn't, and they want to keep living their lives that way, but it's going to catch up with them eventually. Verse 8 is another sort of contrast here. If I ascend up to heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there. Not that God resides in hell, but what he's trying to say is that regardless of what side of that continuum you're on, God's going to find you. God's going to see you. Verse number 9, another contrast. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea. I Googled this the other day to see what bird is the highest flying bird. I forgot the name of it, but it's a species of vulture that flies about 30,000 to 32,000 feet up in the air. That's like where airplanes fly. That's the altitude of airplanes. Now think about the deepest part of the ocean. It's the Mariana Trench. It's about 6 miles below the surface. 6 miles of water. And believe it or not, there are creatures that live down there. The pressure is something like 15,000 pounds per square inch. And I don't, you think of that number and it doesn't really mean anything. I looked it up and it said it'd be like if 100 elephants were stacked on top of each other and put on top of your head. That's what the pressure would be like. So you think about just our world and that vast difference between 30,000 feet up and 6 miles down. God sees it all. He sees that vulture. He sees that crab or whatever it is that can live down there. It's an interesting thing to think about. But then he sums it up in verse 10. Even there, in all those places he was talking about, high, low, there shall thy hand lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. Once again, we have this symbolism of God's hand. John Gill, in his commentary, makes an interesting point. He says, the Lord lays hold on his people and apprehends them for himself and claims his interest in them. He holds them in his ways, that they will not slip or fall, and he upholds them with the right hand of his righteousness, and they are safe. And he holds them from going into or in wrong ways to their hurt. I'm reminded of Jesus' statement in John 10:28 when he says, and I give unto them, he's talking about people that are faithful to him, eternal life. They shall never perish, neither shall any man pluck them out of thy hand. My Father which gave them to me is greater than all, and no man is able to pluck them out of my Father's hand. So we have a place of security there. Now, does that mean that's a permanent security? No. We have the ability to rid ourselves of that security if we reject God, if we start living in a way that's not in line with God's word. So that's kind of a thing that we always have to be wondering about. We're in a safe place, but it's not necessarily eternally safe. We control whether we stay in that safe place or whether we don't have that assurance. Verse 11, if I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, even the night shall be light about me. Yea, the darkness hideth not from thee, but the night shineth as the day. The darkness and light are both alike to thee. Here we have another contrast. He's saying it doesn't matter if it's light, if it's dark. Just because it's dark, that doesn't mean God can't see you. Light and dark are meaningless to God. He can see everything, unlike us. When it gets dark, do you think it's a coincidence that most crimes are committed in the dark? No, because people can get away with things. It's harder to see them. It's harder to recognize them or identify them. But God knows who they are. The darkness means nothing to him. Here's an interesting turn of a phrase. Verse 13, for thou hast possessed my reins. Thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. The word reins, when I see the word reins, I think of something on a horse, right? Reining a horse. That's not what it's talking about here, though. In Scripture, when you see that word, it's talking about the inward parts, the heart or the seat of the affections or passions. And he says, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. Some other synonyms for that might be hidden or concealed, enclosed, sheltered, protected. When you're in the process of growing, in your mother's womb, it's pretty dark in there, right? It's almost like being in complete darkness. But once again, God knows what's in that darkness. And here's where that part that I was talking about, where this is a wonderful antithesis to the pro-choice movement, and this is a pro-life verse here. The way the New King James Version says it, for you formed my inner parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. So God created that little being in the womb. And for someone to come along and say, well, it's my right to just murder that being, where do you get that from? I don't see this verse here as giving anybody any license to kill something that God created. But people, they do it. there's millions of babies that have been lost to abortion. And I have to believe that God feels the same about that as anybody. I don't know if anybody in here has ever lost a child to death. It's a very emotional and something you never really get over. I mean, you might seem a little less severe after time goes by, but you never really get over losing a child. I got to think God has a similar reaction to that when he went through the trouble of creating a being, and now somebody just comes along and kills that. I don't know. It's pretty sobering thought. Verse 14, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. This is probably my favorite verse of this whole psalm, because it's something we need to meditate on daily. When you say, I am fearfully and wonderfully made, the word fearfully is another word that we kind of use in a different way nowadays than they did back then. Fearfully doesn't mean like fear, like I'm scared of something. What he's talking about here is something that causes astonishment or awe, like I'm in awe of how wonderfully I am made. It's also used to inspire reverence or godly fear. I don't know if you've ever stopped to think about how marvelous your body is, the whole totality of it, including your mind. But the poet here, who is David, King David, uses the word marvelous to describe it. And the word marvelous means to be difficult to understand, more simply, something to marvel at. You remember in the New Testament when people would hear Jesus talking when he was a young boy in the temple, they marveled at his teaching, at his knowledge. When they saw miracles, they marveled at those miracles. They weren't able to understand them. They saw them with their eyes, but they couldn't really understand how those things could happen. That's what David's trying to tell us here. Do we know how God designed all of this stuff here, all of these systems working together? No, but we have to be able to appreciate how incredibly complex it is. Do you think all of this could have been created by a chaotic accident, like the evolutionists want you to believe? It's too complex and it's too perfect to be just a matter of chance like that. The human body, in my opinion, is an absolute masterpiece of engineering. Some of you that are going through illnesses or sicknesses might doubt that statement a little bit, but think back a few years, if you have to, and think of the many times that you've been sick with something not really terminal or terrible, and your body just, you were sick for a couple days and then you weren't sick anymore. How'd that happen? Your body has the ability to cure itself of a lot of different things, to fix things that go wrong. You cut yourself, your body knows how to clot the blood. It puts white blood cells over there to stop infections. It does all kinds of things that you have no control over. It's just built right into your system. It's amazing if you stop to think about it. And if you can't appreciate any of that stuff, think about your mind for a while. I have so little understanding, and basically science does too, of how the mind works, that I just have no other reaction but to be in awe of it. Think of what your brain is. It's a bunch of chemicals. But somehow you can control those chemicals. How do we do that? I'm controlling what I'm saying right now, right? You're controlling what you're thinking right now. How do we do that? It just sort of happens? I don't know. I've never met anybody or read anything that could explain to me how that works. But it does, and it's amazing to me. So mark that, underline, highlight, whatever you want to do with that verse. It's one that would be a good one to memorize because it reminds us just how wonderfully made we are. My substance, verse 15, my substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. There's a pretty figurative, poetic expression there. Curiously wrought. Albert Barnes in his commentary says this. It means literally embroidered. Some of you ladies who have done embroidery know how complex that can be and how you have to really pay attention to detail. The Hebrew word actually means to deck out with color, to variegate. So you can almost see God weaving together our personalities, our bodies, each one of us different. You know, you don't see two pieces of embroidery. You might see several pieces that somebody did. They repeated it, and they look the same. God's handiwork doesn't look the same. You look around the room here. None of us look anything like each other. We're all unique. In the lowest parts of the earth, what in the world could that mean? Any of us born in the lower parts of the earth? Probably not, but it's a poetic rendering of the womb where we were formed. A place as dark and obscure and hidden as if we were down in the deepest parts of the earth. Nobody can see into that. Well, of course, now we have technology that can see into the womb and ultrasound and whatnot, different things, but those are, technological advances. A man can't see into a woman's womb. So once again, you want a good argument against abortion? You got it right there. God saw your substance. It was not hidden from him. He made you in secret and knew exactly what he was doing. Verse 16, thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect, and in thy book all my members were written, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them. Let me read you the New King James. Your eyes saw my substance, being yet unformed, and in your book they were all written, the days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them. What he's saying here is, before you were even conceived, before you were even formed, God knew you. He had a plan. He knew how he was going to design you. Our world wants to think of a incomplete fetus or an embryo or something as just a lump of tissue, or just, not something that really is capable of feeling pain, or, whatever other theories people have. This verse contradicts that pretty strongly. Let's move on to verse 17. How precious are all thy thoughts unto me, O God, how great is the sum of them. If I could count them, they are more in number than the sand, and when I awake, I am still with thee. I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, and when I was young, Detroit, Michigan was the place where they built all the cars. So I have a lot of relatives that were in the automotive business. And some of the people that work, I have a few relatives that are like engineers, they're given a piece of a car to engineer. One cousin-in-law of mine, he told me one time that he was working on an oil pan of a car. That was all he did for this car. And I don't know how long that took him, 6 months probably, to just design one piece of the car. Now think about this. Here's God. He has designed the thousands of pieces of you, and you, and you, times 7.8 billion, or however many people there are in the world now. And that's just the humans. What about all the other creatures? How many thoughts did that take to create all those things? How many thoughts would it take to create the human body? Can you imagine how many things you'd have to think of, how all those pieces are going to work together and fit together? And he did that for millions of creatures. So don't get thinking your thoughts are so great.
And he did it without mistake.
Absolutely.
Ed want to tell us today that he put me in a man's body, but really I'm a female. Well, I'm in the female's body, but I'm really a male. And so they want to go about changing what God has designed and produced.
Absolutely. Or, another way, something similar to that, is they can do through various tests, amniocentesis centesis, I guess, now, that they can tell that your baby has going to have a birth defect, or he's maybe going to be have some kind of a mental problem of some sort, and people will say that, well, because of that, God didn't know what he was doing. He made a mistake. Why would God create something imperfect like that? People do not understand God. I don't understand God. I'm not preaching to you about this. People think that they understand everything. They don't. They don't have the big picture. God does. So even though that person, that baby, if you bring it to term and it's born and it has a defect or something, there was a reason that God created that being like that. Do we know what the reason is? Probably not. Does God know what the reason is? Absolutely. Do we have a right to say, well, God, you made a mistake, so we're going to pull the plug on this thing? Of course not. So our thoughts, are so much inferior to God's that I don't even know how to express it. But when you think about how many thoughts it took to make you, that should give you some pause there. Okay, let's move along. Verse 19. I'm missing a piece here. Verse 19. Surely thou wilt slay the wicked, O God. Depart from me, therefore, ye bloody men. Wow, all of a sudden, David makes a complete turn here. He's talking about the human body, how wonderful it is, how the thoughts of God, and then now all of a sudden, boom, he completely switches gears here. He's talking about the evil. Oh, that you should slay the wicked, O God. Why did he do this? I don't know. Perhaps David, when he's contemplating how wonderful things are, he's also thinking about the hearts of men and how vulnerable those hearts are, that they could become good, they could become bad. It's kind of up to them to a large extent, because God gave us free will. He didn't design us to have to think a certain way. He didn't program our brains to think only about God. He gave us free will. So people are going to use that to do wicked things. And David is saying here that he wants no part of those. Depart from me, you bloody men. People who delight in evil don't have any part in the life of a Christian. What are they going to do for you? The only thing they can do is to bring you down and to pull you into their world, which is not where we want to be. Okay, got to rush through these last ones here. Verse 20, for they speak against thee wickedly, thine enemies take thy name in vain. How many people do you hear on television these days taking the Lord's name in vain? If it's only to say, oh my God, OMG. It's like everybody's saying that without any thought to what it means, to what they're saying, and there's a lot worse things that they use to blaspheme the Lord's name, but they're all over the place. David is saying, I understand those people, and I will not follow their example. In fact, verse 21 says, do I not hate them, O Lord, that hate thee? Am I not grieved with those that rise up against thee? There seems to be this misunderstanding in our world today that it's wrong to hate. I see people with yard signs in their yard. Hate has no home here. As soon as I see that sign, I say, you mustn't be a religious person. Because God tells us we are to hate certain things. Not people, but things, evil. Are you going to tell me the guy with that yard sign loves evil? You have no hate, right? You're saying you have no hate, so you love evil. Well, no, I don't love evil. Well, but your sign says hate has no home here. It is not wrong to hate. We just have to know what we're hating. And we should hate things that go against God's will. We don't have the luxury of hating people because those people were made in God's image and they could possibly be brought back into a relationship with God. That's never off the table. Some people get so far away that it's very unlikely, but it's still possible. So we don't hate people, we just hate their deeds. And I love verse 22. I hate them with perfect hatred. Does perfect hatred sound like an oxymoron to you? Perfect hatred. I think what he's trying to say there is the word perfect just means complete. I just hate what they are doing because they are going against God. David had a great disdain for God's enemies. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. The interesting word in that phrase is try me. It means to test or to examine or to scrutinize. God is going to test us. He's going to try us. You can be sure of that. It might be through some health issue. It might be through a financial issue. It might be a relationship issue. You name it. But we are going to be tried, and we need to understand that is not God doing something to us. God is testing us. And we need to be aware of that so that we can pass that test. And finally, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. So David was smart enough. He wasn't being arrogant here. He was smart enough to know that, you know what? I could sin. It's in the realm of possibility. Even though I'm a man after God's own heart, as God said about him. But he still had that opportunity to sin, and he did sin, as we all know. But that sentiment right there is a prayer that every one of us should probably pray every day of our lives. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me in the way everlasting. I want to do some quick applications here. I'm probably not going to get through all 10 of these, but some things that we can learn from Psalm 139. It's on the last page of your handout there. We should be thankful to God for the wonderful way we were made by him. That should never escape our thought process. We should never fail to be in awe of the capabilities and impeccable design of our own bodies. Sometimes we disdain our bodies when they don't do what we want them to do, but we really need to be careful about that. We should be thankful for God's intimate knowledge of us, having known us even before we were born. We should be grateful for the time and effort God took in designing each and every one of us as unique human beings. None of God's other living creatures can make that claim. If I lined up 50 hyenas right here, could you recognize one from the other? Probably not. They might have a little bit of different spots, but they pretty much all look the same. If I lined up 100 little ants, could you distinguish one from another? No. If I lined up 100 human beings, I could pick you out of those 100 like that, easily, right? We're unique. We should strive to have God on our minds in all that we do. We should be in awe of God's omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence, and grateful that no other being is more powerful than God. Sometimes it seems in our world that Satan is more powerful than God, and in this world, he has a lot of power, but he is not more powerful than God. And I'll skip to the last one. This might be controversial to some folks, but we should desire that God will test us from time to time so that we can prove to him and to ourselves that our faith and our ability to resist temptation is strong. If I said, hey, Joe, are you a faithful person? He's going to say, yeah, I'm a faithful person. How do you know? Well, I go to church every week. I do this, I do that. Have you ever really been tested? Well, no, but I know I'm faithful and I know I can handle it. You really don't know until you've been tested. So beware of those tests and keep the faith, as they say, so that you can continue to walk with the Lord. I thank you very much for your kind attention.